Do you remember this save point from the first chapter of Deltarune? You arrive here after entering the Dark World for the first time in Chapter 1, right before meeting Ralsei. It's not exactly the most memorable moment in the game, and it was also 4 chapters ago now, but it's been bouncing around in my head basically ever since I saw it for the first time in 2018. When you interact with it, it says, "In front of you a castle looms beneath the empty town. A black geyser emerges from it, piercing endlessly into the sky. The power of this place shines within you." It's hard to describe the genuine sense of wonder I felt when seeing this at the time. It was late at night on Halloween. I had just gotten home from a party, only to find out that Toby Fox had shadow dropped something. I wasn't even sure what it was, if it was even a game, but I quickly accepted everything that will happen from now on, with this immense sense of mystery and intrigue in the air. Reaching that save point, and hearing that evocative description of the world, it was hard not to immediately get swept up in the journey that lay ahead. So you speak to Ralsei and learn about the prophecy, and when you come back outside to that save point again, the text has changed. It now reads, "Ralsei the Lonely Prince is now your ally. The power of fluffy boys shines within you." At first, we're given this description of a world dripping with mystique. The castle is looming, the fountain pierces endlessly into the sky. It's really vivid writing, and it immediately draws you closer into the world, painting a much more detailed picture of this lonely castle town. And then side by side, moments later, we get a line like, "The power of fluffy boys shines within you." How is it that Toby Fox can be in one moment incredibly sincere, taking the magic of his world so seriously, and then at the drop of a hat so jokey and ironic? How is it that these two things feel so complementary instead of at odds? Well, it's not just Toby Fox making art like this. That kind of oscillation between serious and silly, sincerity and irony, has been noticed all over the place. In a 2010 article, New York Magazine art critic Jerry Saltz said he was seeing a change in the way artists were approaching their art. "I'm noticing a new approach to art making in recent museum and gallery shows. It's an attitude that says, I know the art I'm creating may seem silly, even stupid, or that it might have been done before, but that doesn't mean this isn't serious." At once knowingly self-conscious about art, unafraid and unashamed, these young artists not only see the distinction between earnestness and detachment as artificial, they grasp that they can be ironic and sincere at the same time, and they are making art from this compound, complex state of mind. Saltz wasn't alone. By that time, many people had realized a new art movement was taking form, bubbling up since the turn of the century. Lots of ideas for what that might be have been thrown into the ring, but there's one in particular which I think not only describes the current cultural movement we're living in, but also helps us understand exactly what Toby Fox is trying to achieve with Deltarune. It's called Metamodernism. If you're scratching your head, then don't worry. We've got a bit of ground to cover, but my guarantee is that you'll walk away from this video with a new way of thinking about Deltarune as a video game, as well as some of its core concepts, which might otherwise seem a bit nebulous. So we'll start with the obvious question, what the hell is metamodernism, what are you talking about? And once that's out of the way, we'll explore one of the most obvious metamodern techniques Deltarune utilizes, which is oscillation. Between light and dark, between sincerity and irony, between all these varied gameplay styles. How and why is Deltarune always oscillating between these often conflicting ideas? By understanding Deltarune as a metamodern work of art, we just might be able to better understand what's coming next. Sound good? Then great, because I'm sneaking a history lesson into your Deltarune video essay. You've probably heard the words modernism and postmodernism thrown around in the past. And although it's a bit less likely, you might have heard of metamodernism too. They're very broad descriptors which can apply to lots of things, but for our purposes here we can think of them as art movements. Descriptors for the art people made, the techniques they used, and the ideals and worldviews those artworks embodied throughout certain periods of history. Let's take a quick look at all three. Modernism sprung up somewhere around the turn of the century, and it was based on ideas around progress, innovation, and idealism. In this explainer from the Tate Museum, they say that modernism assumed that certain ultimate universal principles or truths such as those formulated by religion or science could be used to understand or explain reality. With industrialization, advances in science, new ideas in philosophy, modernists rejected traditional ideas to explore new ways of painting, new ways of writing, new ways of building. The belief was that we can use reason to find objective truth about everything, to create a utopia. It was a chance to break away from what had already been established and try new things, in an era where everything was already changing. So for example, you can think of surrealist artists like Salvador Dali or Frida Kahlo, or the kinds of authors you probably had to study at school like Virginia Woolf and F. Scott Fitzgerald. Moving ahead to somewhere in the 1950s, postmodernism was something of a response from those who were tired of or felt restricted by the core tenets of modernism. A lot of people felt disillusioned by 2 world wars and a few decades of failed utopia building. Instead, postmodernists looked to highlight the people and the experiences on the fringes, outside of the dominant perspective. There is no universal truth, just individual experience. Irony and juxtaposition are common hallmarks of postmodern art, and where modernist works might be invested in clarity, postmodern art is often layered and complex. So you can think of authors like Thomas Pynchon and David Foster Wallace, who wrote these sprawling, absurd and satirical novels, or artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, who broke down barriers between high art and pop culture. Then skipping ahead to the late 90s and into the early 2000s, the same sort of thing happened. Artists were tired of the irony and insincerity of postmodernism, so something new emerged. Unlike the last two though, what that something new is exactly is still being debated, often under the slightly silly umbrella of postmodernism. One suggestion though is metamodernism. Now, when you hear me say meta in this context, it's unrelated to metafiction, the game being aware of itself or breaking the fourth wall. Same root word, the Greek metaxy, but different meanings. For the sake of this video, just separate the two in your head for now. Metamodernism was first put forward by theorists Timotheus Vermeulen and Robin van den Akker in 2010, and they described it as an oscillation between the modern and the postmodern, between a modern enthusiasm and a postmodern irony, between hope and melancholy, between naivety and knowingness, empathy and apathy, unity and plurality, totality and fragmentation, purity and ambiguity. You can think of it as a pendulum swinging, never arriving at one destination, but oscillating between them. In their words, each time the metamodern enthusiasm swings toward fanaticism, gravity pulls it back toward irony. The moment its irony sways toward apathy, gravity pulls it back toward enthusiasm. That's the definition of metamodernism we'll be working with in this video. An oscillation between opposites, integrating modernist and postmodernist ideas and perspectives. But there's one other important aspect of metamodernism, which writer Greg Dember explains. The essence of metamodernism is a motivation to protect the solidity of felt experience against the scientific reductionism of the modernist perspective and the ironic detachment of the postmodern sensibility. That's the reason for this oscillation, the driving force behind it, felt experience, the earnest emotions which guide the story's characters and themes. Rather than falling into the pitfalls of its predecessors, the presumed universal truths of modernism which ignore the people and experiences on the fringe of society, and the constant skepticism and irony of postmodernism, metamodernism avoids them by oscillating between them, and in the process centers the felt experience of its characters, its creator, and its audience. So before we start applying this to Deltarune, I'd like to very quickly illustrate the difference between modernism, postmodernism, and metamodernism, with some actual examples. It's all well and good to talk about them in abstract terms, but in case anyone is still a bit unsure what I'm talking about, I think it'll help to apply these ideas to something more concrete. We'll keep it brief, but if you already get the gist, feel free to skip ahead. Video games as a medium haven't really been around long enough to have useful examples for this, so here's 3 animations which should hopefully show the evolution between these 3 movements: Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, The Simpsons, and BoJack Horseman. Starting with Snow White, it's a very quintessentially modernist film. Released in 1937, it was one of the first ever feature-length animated films, essentially kickstarting an entire genre. While the story is based on a traditional fairy tale, it has been adjusted, Disney-fied if you will. The original story, as with many traditional fairy tales, communicates its morality through violent punishment. The evil queen is forced to wear hot iron shoes and dance until she dies at the end, because it wouldn't be a fairy tale without not just the death of the villain, but a cruel and unusual death. The Disney film instead seeks to reinforce those modernist universal truths. Good defeats evil, love conquers all, the heroes live happily ever after. So we have a focus on technical innovation and experimenting with new forms through feature-length animation, and we also see the way modernism questions the foundations of traditional stories, in the way Snow White softens the original fairy tale's most gruesome aspects and provides a clearer emotional hook and message to take away through those universal truths. That's modernism, baby! Now, if we skip forward 50 years of animation history, we reach The Simpsons, first airing in 1989. Before I say anything, I'm sure you can immediately spot the differences between this and something like Snow White, even if you wouldn't instinctively label them as modern and postmodern. Just in terms of structure, The Simpsons is a parody of both the generic TV family sitcom and of the American middle-class nuclear family in general. The show's humor is drenched in irony, and it breaks away from that Disney idealized happily ever after model. The family is always dysfunctional. There is no moral lesson learned, no universal truths discovered. The focus is almost always on satirizing the very idea of a singular truth, often through particularly postmodern techniques like pastiche, intertextuality, and metafiction. That's postmodernism, baby! Then finally, we can fast forward to 2014 with BoJack Horseman. Stylistically, it seems like it should be right at home alongside a show like The Simpsons, an adult-oriented cartoon, right? Let's just take a quick look at the Wikipedia page and... it's a tragicomedy, apparently. BoJack Horseman uses that initial framing of the animated sitcom, but it isn't restricted to it. Instead, it oscillates. Tragedy and comedy, sincerity and irony. The show has been repeatedly praised for the way it deals with issues like alcoholism, abuse, sexual harassment, topics you would never find treated with care in a postmodern show like The Simpsons. But it's still funny. It still leans into that postmodern parody and intertextuality. It doesn't just choose to be earnest or choose to be ironic. It's not just a serious story like Snow White, or a satire like The Simpsons. BoJack Horseman oscillates between the two. That's metamodernism, baby! Hopefully that gives you a better idea of how this looks in practice. All three are animated stories, but each takes a very different approach in both how their story is told and the type of message they want to impart on their audience. Obviously, you can delve much deeper into all three of these movements and their characteristics, but I hope this has given enough of the basics that it doesn't sound like I'm spouting complete nonsense. So hey, remember Deltarune? The game this video was supposed to be about? Now that we've established what metamodernism is and how that oscillation looks in practice, I'd like to talk about the way Deltarune utilizes it throughout the first 4 chapters. I have 3 main points I'd like to touch on, between them covering the structure of the game and its world building, the writing both from moment to moment and on a macro scale, and the actual gameplay itself. While this is really only scratching the surface of what makes the game meta-modern, I think it sheds a light on what Toby Fox is building with Deltarune. So let's take a look. Number 1. The Dark Worlds represent modernism, while the Light World represents postmodernism. This covers a lot of things really. Remember, it was a legend of hope and dreams, of light and dark. From the beginning, Toby Fox wants us to know the world of Deltarune is a duality. When we're first introduced to the Light World, Chris wakes up and goes to school. They live what appears to be a normal life, in a normal town. It's mundane, average. The first real roadblock of the game is trying to find a partner to work on a school project with. Then we're introduced to the Dark World, a place of mystery, intrigue. Chris learns that they're central to a prophecy that will decide the fate of the world, and they take up their role as a hero, embarking on a journey across a strange, unfamiliar world. And once their journey is over, they're back at school. They walk through their normal town, filled with normal people. That initial framing of moving between 2 worlds is itself an oscillation between this realistic, ordinary light world and the mysterious, fantastical dark world. Reality and fiction. Light and dark. But it doesn't just stop there. Another key contrast between the two worlds is bleakness and optimism. The Dark Worlds are a kind of possible utopia. None of them are perfect, each faced with their own problems, but they're full of people who believe their world can be fixed, improved, made perfect. In Chapter 2, once more fountains open and darkness spreads, Queen believes Noelle and everyone can live in bliss, free of fear and suffering. King feels almost the same way. He sees his own utopia, just not for Lightners. Tenor does what the Knight wants in service of his perfect world, one where he has an audience again, and people are watching TV. Ralsei believes that sealing the fountains and following the prophecy will bring about balance, with Castletown as its own utopia for Darkners. It doesn't matter so much that Dark Worlds aren't perfect, or that each proposed method for making them perfect is fundamentally flawed. What's key is their belief in their own single, universally true answer to bring about a utopia. This was characteristic of modernism. Here's writer Greg Dember. Modernism was characterized by a faith in rationally derived and universally applied models of social organization as a solution to world problems. Free market capitalism, collectivist communism, and nationalistic fascism all shared the universalist notion that there was one best way to organize society, and the adherents of each believed that theirs was the one best way. By the end of Chapter 4, the Fun Gang is starting to question that feeling. But even at their lowest, there's an abundance of hope in the Dark World. They defeat a powerful enemy despite the odds. Susie chooses to believe they can change fate, and they meet a wise old man who gives them guidance, who explicitly warns against a more postmodern view. Ain't no better story than one told with sparkling eyes. She ain't got no fear, that one. Doubt, irony, that's what poisons your story. That and too much predictability. So if Dark Worlds are full of this optimism, this belief that a perfect world is achievable against the odds, that doubt and irony are what poisons a story, what about the Light World? Like I mentioned earlier, the Light World is realistic, or about as realistic as you can get in a town of talking animals, sentient flames, and whatever the hell that thing is. And as a result, there's a stark contrast in the kinds of problems characters face here, and their responses to those problems, compared to what we see in the Dark Worlds. Hometown seems to be inspired by the work of David Lynch, particularly Twin Peaks. Both present us with a small town which appears wholesome and friendly at first glance, but holds immense darkness under the surface. The more we learn about Hometown and its inhabitants, we find the reality is a lot more bleak than it first seemed. Chris, our main character, is an outsider, the only human in a town of monsters. Their parents are divorced, their brother has moved away to go to college, they've drifted apart from their childhood friend, they're bullied at school. Noelle's mum is cold and distant, her dad is in the hospital, her sister went missing one day and nobody knows where she is, hardly anyone talks about her. Susie keeps her cards close to her chest, but it's clear she hasn't had a good upbringing, her home life is troubled. Asgore lost his job and his family, and he's struggling to even pay his rent. Even minor NPCs around town like Metaton or the Rabbit Lady seem to be grappling with a lack of meaning in their lives. The conviction of the optimistic, modernist Dark World embraces easy solutions to problems, expanding the darkness, a spell for healing, while the relativism of the bleak, postmodern Light World tells us there are no easy fixes for some problems, that there is no universal answer. There is no spell to bring back a lost girl, or solve a relationship breakdown. I think Chapter 3's ending is a really good example of this oscillation between optimism and bleakness. We watch the stakes of the Fun Gang's adventures sink in real time when they leave the fantasy and return to reality. They're all aware of the stakes of the prophecy, the importance of sealing the fountains, but that doesn't stop them from having some fun with Tenor's games for a while. Then the Knight kidnaps Undyne, takes her out of the Dark World and to the shelter. We're very quickly faced with the seriousness of what they've gotten into. This isn't just a fantasy. What happens in the Dark World has real repercussions in the Light World. We oscillate from the epitome of Dark World fantasy, an epic battle with a mysterious knight, to the stark realism of the Light World. A high-energy battle theme song is replaced by emptiness, just the ambient sounds of the outdoors and Susie's futile banging on the door. Chris, Susie, and the audience are faced with the realization that real people are going to be hurt as a result of this adventure. There are two more ideas I think Deltarune oscillates between through light and dark which I'd like to mention, and they sort of go together: nostalgic and futuristic, humble and epic. Hometown is built primarily on nostalgia. In the most obvious sense, nostalgia for Undertale. Coming back to Hometown is our chance to spend more time with our favourite Undertale characters. The ending of Chapter 1 in particular is something of a victory lap, a chance to see these characters which we grew so attached to once again. And that only becomes more potent as time goes on. We've just recently passed 10 years since Undertale's release, and I'm sure a lot of people, including myself, feel a strong sense of nostalgia looking back on playing that game for the first time back in 2015. What's interesting is that as the audience sees Hometown for the first time, Toby Fox wants us to feel a connection back to our time playing Undertale, as he explains in the Fangamer livestream of Deltarune Chapter 1.
The beginning of this game is all about the first impressions. I really wanted people think it was potentially Undertale. So I put so much effort into making Undertale looking world. That goes down to the menus and the characters.
If you'd like to hear more about why Toby Fox wanted us to be thinking about Undertale here, and why Undertale characters are even in Deltarune in the first place, I wrote a blog post about it a little while ago. I think it's pretty good personally, I'll put a link in the description. More than just invoking Undertale though, the opening of Deltarune is specifically invoking the game's true pacifist ending, where we see our favourite characters living a new life on the surface. I mean look, even the schools are identical. But as we learn more about the town, and as the game progresses, it's made clear that this isn't the happily ever after world of true pacifist. Like we just discussed, Hometown is bleak. It carries a great darkness. Its postmodern nature rejects the very idea of a happily ever after, because it is built on the perspective that life is never that simple. Hometown has this kind of complicated nostalgia not just with Undertale, but also with a broader cultural nostalgia, again much in the same way as Twin Peaks. It's this idea of a wholesome small American town where everybody knows everybody. There's a cozy diner, approachable if ineffective authority figures, strange but beloved townsfolk. You or I may not have ever lived in an idealistic 1950s small American town, and yet it's still a nostalgia many of us share. You could call it rose-tinted glasses, nostalgia for a world that may not have ever existed, and if it did, it probably wasn't as idealistic as we imagine it to be. But while the light world goes out of its way to show us the darkness lurking under the surface like we talked about, it's never trying to discount what makes the town lovable. We're still able to revel in the opportunity to talk to our favourite characters. It's still nice to go and visit the diner and hang out with Susie. You could argue that this is a small oscillation in itself, the beauty of nostalgia and the inherent darkness of rose-tinted glasses. They coexist in Hometown, and we buy into both aspects, but our sense of Hometown is undeniably coloured by this humble, nostalgic feeling. So moving across to the Dark World, we see those ideas flipped around entirely. The characters we're already familiar with, the Undertale characters we know and love, are not here. We have no nostalgia for this world or these characters. It's an entirely new experience. Even the menus, the battle mechanics, the talk sprites. We're taken away from the environment we feel comfortable in, surrounded by dynamics we already know, and brought to an entirely new world with new challenges. The nostalgic replaced with the futuristic, the humble replaced with the epic. Remember in Chapter 1, our biggest challenge in the light world was finding a partner for a school project. But in the Dark World, we're immediately introduced to grand stakes, a world-ending threat, a prophecy which tells the future, 3 heroes of destiny. The Fun Gang fights high-stakes battles, journeying across worlds to fulfill their destiny and save the worlds from certain doom. The difference between their lives in the light world and the dark world couldn't be any more stark, from simple teenagers to legendary heroes. And to be clear, the epic encompasses much more than just the grand nature of their journey, or their roles within it. The conflicts are clean-cut, good versus evil, like we discussed with Snow White. The Dark Worlds and modernism as a whole sell this idea that evil is conquerable. It exists in a tangible way, and all we need to do is stop it. That could mean putting the bad guy in prison, or getting through to them on an emotional level. But what's key is that the Dark World is a place where heroes exist, where they can spring into action and good can conquer evil. Love wins. But this obviously isn't true in the light world, which is the postmodern argument. Good and evil don't exist in such a clean-cut way. Problems are always going to be layered and complex. Like we talked about earlier, life just isn't that simple. Now, we could talk forever about the ways the light world and dark world contrast each other, act as polar opposites. But what's important is how it embodies this pendulum swinging motion. By literally moving between these two worlds throughout each chapter, the pendulum swings from one side to the other. We move from light to dark, back to light, back to dark, relativism to conviction, nostalgic to futuristic, reality to fiction. Instead of committing to one side of these ideas, Fox acknowledges them both, and in doing so transcends them. Deltarune is not so naive to believe a perfect world is easy to achieve, but it allows its characters to hope for one anyway. It's not willing to let us embrace the nostalgia of some perfect past wholeheartedly, but it doesn't disregard those feelings or treat them as misguided. Vermeulen and Vandenacker, who I mentioned earlier as the ones who coined the term metamodernism, use these contradictory sounding phrases like informed naivety and pragmatic idealism to describe this oscillation. And I think we connect with the game's characters better as a result. Their felt experience is protected. We're given an opportunity to understand why King, Queen, or Tenor act the way they do. They might not succeed at redeeming themselves, but they're never just written off as evil. So we understand them better, we empathize with them, even if we don't necessarily forgive their actions. Susie herself embodies this better than anyone. We watch in real time as she grapples with her difficult upbringing, one which has taught her that lashing out is safer than trusting others. We see her take the lessons of the Dark World to heart. I think that's all made possible by the game's Oscillation, its recognition of a variety of viewpoints, and its willingness to commit to optimism, acknowledging that it might seem naive. Number 2. Sincerity and irony weaved together bring the audience closer to the experience. Chances are this is something you've already noticed about Deltarune, even if it's not something you've put into words. As I mentioned in the opening, the game strikes a very delicate balance between building a world with mystery, intrigue, emotion, and also doing dumb bits wherever possible. It's an oscillation that Toby Fox maintains throughout the game, never letting one overshadow or undercut the other. Deltarune's most serious moments don't feel cheapened by the fact we were laughing a moment ago. If anything, they're heightened. This is directly inspired by a similar balance found in the Mother series, as Toby Fox told Famitsu in 2017 when discussing Undertale. What really influenced me from Japanese games, the Mother series in particular, is how they pull on your heartstrings in a way that movies, books, and TV can't. The Mother series, especially Mother 3, hits a spectacular balance between humor and seriousness. In the less serious parts, it really feels like you've become friends with the game somehow, and that makes it all the more painful when you get to the sad parts. Here, Fox calls it a balance between humor and seriousness, and I think that's true to a certain extent. When looking at Undertale or Deltarune in their entirety, neither game is more serious than funny, or vice versa. But I think the moment-to-moment experience of playing Deltarune is less of a balance and more of a pendulum swing. To take a step back for a moment, I want to talk about why Deltarune's humor works so well. I honestly can't think of many games that have actually made me laugh out loud, but it feels effortless with Deltarune. The most obvious answer is simply because I have a similar sense of humor to Toby Fox. I connect with the references he makes, and the late 2000s and early 2010s internet humor he's inspired by. But Deltarune's fanbase is massively diverse, and spans lots of different cultures and generations, so that can't be the only reason his comedy functions so well. I think Fox has already given the reason in that quote about Mother. It really feels like you've become friends with the game somehow. Deltarune's jokes feel like inside jokes. Unlike with other forms of media, it's not as simple as hearing somebody else tell a joke and reacting to it separately. When a joke plays out, it feels like the audience is in on it. Here's an example. At the start of Chapter 3, Tenor asks us to give an arcade-style 3-letter name, and he jokes, "I'd give you 4, but the censors would kill me." So naturally, on my first playthrough, my instinct was to think of a 3-letter swear word to see if he'd comment on it. And just as naturally, Toby Fox anticipated this. Susie and I ended up sharing a brain cell and both picking ass, and a unique interaction plays out. In other forms of media, the standard flow of a joke is setup and punchline, but in Deltarune, an extra step is added in between. The player is prompted to play along with the joke, so to speak. It feels less like watching a stand-up special and more like iterating on a bit with a friend, someone who's anticipating where your brain will go and has their joke planned accordingly. Another example would be at the Trash Zone in Chapter 2. The unwritten rule of RPGs is to try to interact with everything. Doesn't matter if you get the exact same flavor text each time, you keep interacting on the off chance there's something different. So here in the Trash Zone you have a couple of trash bags that look like eggplants. Then the screen scrolls over and there's an eggplant that looks like a trash bag. It's really dumb, but aside from being a silly sight gag, the player also has to exert effort, however minimal, to check each one. We have the option of walking straight past. So by choosing to take the gamble on there being something funny in the flavor text here, we feel more in on the joke. I think this is why Deltarune's comedy connects so much with people, to the point that its jokes often get run into the ground by the community as time goes on. There's an active element to the humor which requires involvement from the player, so even its scripted jokes feel like jokes we made together, with the game. Toby Fox has a really strong sense of what game designer Doug Church calls perceivable consequences, a clear reaction from the game world to the action of the player. Fox knows how to anticipate what players are going to try to interact with, what things they might try to do, and he builds his comedy around those expectations. He knew I was going to try to write ass as a result of Tenna's dialogue, so he planned an interaction accordingly. He knows that players will interact with everything they're physically able to, so flavor text is more often than not written with that in mind, varied accordingly. I know nobody wants to hear why jokes are funny, but the reason it's important is that it builds a level of trust between the player and the game. Despite what I said earlier, I don't just try to interact with everything because it's what you do when playing RPGs. I do it because there's a level of goodwill between myself and the game. Having played Undertale and the first 4 chapters of Deltarune, I have enough trust in Toby Fox and his team that I'll be rewarded for my actions. I've seen those examples of jokes which are instigated by the player, that lampoon our expectations, and it communicates to me that I should keep interacting with everything, trying to do whatever comes to mind, because the game is usually one step ahead of me. And that doesn't just apply to jokes. When I first played the Mantle game in the S-rank room in Chapter 3, as soon as I found out I could destroy trees with the sword, the first thing I did was try to go out of bounds to see what would happen. Turns out that was actually the way to progress, which I didn't know at all. I just had faith that a game like Deltarune would hide something there. So Toby Fox and his team have faith that the player will interact with the game a certain way, to find the silly jokes that they've set up, while the player has faith that the game will respond to their actions a certain way, and deliver silly jokes based on those actions. This trust is the foundation of Deltarune, and it's what Toby Fox was describing earlier. It really feels like you've become friends with the game somehow. I think this is what allows that oscillation between sincerity and irony. My question at the beginning of this video was, how is it possible for Toby Fox to switch at a moment's notice from taking the magic of his world so seriously to being jokey and ironic? I would argue that it works because we trust that our interest in both aspects of the game will be rewarded, that both sides of that dichotomy will be fulfilled. Looking back 4 chapters later on that save point I was talking about, it doesn't really feel tonally inappropriate to contain both this serious, evocative description of the world and a silly joke. Because we understand that yes, this is a comedy game, there are laughs ahead, but this is also a serious game. The world will be taken seriously. In a different game, seeing sincerity and irony mixed together so closely might be unnerving. It might suggest that one of the two will be discarded or treated with less care. The game will stop being funny to focus on a serious story, or vice versa. But we feel like the game is our friend, and we put our faith into it. We trust Toby Fox to be silly and serious. It's metamodernism that allows this to take place at all. To return to that quote from Jerry Saltz in the beginning, it's an attitude that says, I know the art I'm creating may seem silly, even stupid, but that doesn't mean this isn't serious. These young artists not only see the distinction between earnestness and detachment as artificial, they grasp that they can be ironic and sincere at the same time. Finally, number 3. Oscillating between gameplay styles reflects the weight and importance of the game's many inspirations. This is something I found really interesting in contrast to Undertale. That game is a pretty straightforward fusion of two genres, turn-based RPG and bullet hell. And to a certain extent it kind of had to be. Undertale is a commentary on the RPG genre. Dramatically departing from it while trying to explore it wouldn't really make sense. But now, it does feel a bit like Toby Fox has been unshackled, and varied gameplay elements are now a staple of Deltarune. I would argue it's one of the game's defining features, its ability to oscillate between dramatically different styles of gameplay without flinching. It's another bullet hell RPG. No, it's a Punch-Out clone. No, it's Choo Choo Rocket. No, it's actually a Zelda clone. No, it's a rhythm game. No, it's cowboy-themed whack-a-mole. No, it's whatever this is. Oh, Pluie. I get it now. If we compare back to Undertale, it would be disingenuous to say that game didn't have variety in its gameplay. That's what the soul modes are for. Most major bosses change the rule of battle, usually restricting your moveset to allow for different kinds of attacks. And to be clear, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Undertale establishes its core concept, turn-based bullet hell, and then iterates on it in different, unique ways. That's good. But it's very different from what Deltarune is doing, which is fully committing to shifting genres, doing something entirely outside of the perimeters of what's been established. I think the mantle fight in Chapter 3 is a really good example of this. It's not turn-based anymore, and I wouldn't really call it bullet hell either. It's a straight-up 2D Zelda boss fight. This isn't putting a unique spin on established mechanics, it's foregoing them entirely, doing something else. Elsewhere in Deltarune, the facade of the core gameplay does sometimes remain, like with the Giga Queen fight at the end of Chapter 2, or the WarioWare-esque fight with Tenna in Chapter 3. But it's fascinating how Fox and his team are willing to commit to a complete format change, to not limit themselves to the confines of their genre. And I think this is deeply metamodern in nature, both the reasoning behind it and the execution. For one, there's a very obvious oscillation happening when we physically switch between these gameplay styles. While we're not oscillating between opposites like we've been discussing in the previous sections, there is a back and forth rhythm to it. Chapter 3 does a good job at emphasizing this, but you can see it all over the game. Deltarune's gameplay is never set in stone, always changing. I think the main reason behind this is to pay homage to the games which inspired Deltarune. Toby Fox has never been subtle about his love for the media which inspired him. The DNA of games like Earthbound and the rest of the Mother series are all over Undertale and Deltarune, but there's something of a sliding scale for how the game calls back to what came before it. On one end you have a small nod, something like the Devo reference in the Task Manager fight, but then on the other you have a fully playable Punch-Out sequence. Both achieve the same goal of calling out and appreciating something which inspired Deltarune, but Fox has taken extra care to elevate video games specifically above other references. This is particularly interesting when you consider the cultural reputation of video games in general. If you're here watching this video, you're probably pretty comfortable recognizing that video games are an art form, one just as valid and worthwhile as films, novels, paintings, and so on. But while it's easy for us to make that assessment, and it's far from some fringe idea, I don't think the culture has entirely caught up. There's still a pervasive perception of video games as toys, disposable entertainment that doesn't necessitate closer inspection or respect. Of course, I should be clear, the correct answer to that line of thinking is who cares? It doesn't really matter what other people think of the artistic value of something, as long as you, the person experiencing it, found value in it. But the reason I bring it up is that I think in elevating the reference and homage of video games above other forms of media in Deltarune, Fox is also elevating them to a position of authority in a way. When I introduced Metamodernism at the start of the video, I mentioned this quote from Greg Dember. The essence of Metamodernism is a motivation to protect the solidity of felt experience against the scientific reductionism of the modernist perspective and the ironic detachment of the postmodern sensibility. And it's that felt experience that I think is so important, both to Metamodernism generally and to Deltarune specifically. I think it motivates the entire game, this idea of allowing the world and these characters to be authentic, to feel things that elsewhere might be written off as cringe or naive. This motivation to protect felt experience extends to the player too. I think anyone who has ever had a nerdy interest or passion, Toby Fox included, knows what it feels like to have that dismissed, to have that interest treated as lesser. So Deltarune acts as a kind of celebration of video games, an acknowledgement of their power, their meaning. As you already know, this is a game full of purpose. There are so many ideas Toby Fox wants to communicate to his audience, emotions he wants to impart on them. Doing so through the lens of the video games that came before Deltarune sends a powerful message, which ties into one of the core concepts of the entire game. Fiction is important, it has meaning, it can change us. Not only is it okay to feel strong emotions from this game, but all the games that came before it too. Think about the origins of the Dark Worlds themselves. The story being told and the emotions we felt as an audience over the course of Chapter 1, in a world of playing cards and board games, were not any less valid than the story and emotions of Chapter 3, in a world of television. It's an even playing field, where fiction is what's important, regardless of its medium. By elevating the celebration of video games to the forefront of Deltarune, above all the other cultural references made by the game, Fox is not only giving those individual games the respect they rightfully deserve and are often missing, but extending that celebration to the audience too. And it's achieved thanks to a metamodern oscillation through gameplay styles, as well as a continued focus and commitment to preserving felt experience. So those are my 3 points. Between them, we've covered metamodern oscillation in Deltarune's structure, writing, and gameplay. So, in other words, across the entire game. And to be clear, I think this is barely scratching the surface of Deltarune's relationship with metamodernism. Oscillation is just one of a handful of techniques used throughout the game which are absolutely metamodern in nature. I might talk about some of these in more detail in future videos. We'll see. But wow, gosh darn it, would you look at the time? The conclusion will be here any minute now. So before we wrap up with some final thoughts, I want to briefly talk about the future of Deltarune. 4 chapters is a lot, but there's 3 more on their way. Are we going to see this oscillation continue to be used in future chapters? Yes, the answer is yes. Most of what we've talked about today are things that will continue through the rest of the game. There will be more gameplay switch-ups, there will be jokes punctuating serious moments, and so on. But since you sat patiently and listened to me ramble all the way through this video, I'd like to share 2 quick theories for the future of Deltarune, both informed directly by metamodernism. First of all, Gaster, because it wouldn't be a Deltarune theory video without this guy showing up. We talked a lot earlier about the different ways that the light and dark dichotomy manifests, but one very important one I didn't mention is fate and freedom. Gaster is closely associated with freedom. He says he wants to create a new future, and is referenced in conversations about Jevil and Spamton, whose stories revolve around freedom. By contrast, we have the Angel, who is closely tied to fate. Chapter 4 gives us the suggestion that the Angel created the prophecy, that it chooses the future of all Lightners in Hometown. More broadly, Chapter 4 is all about the friction between fate and freedom, whether the Fun Gang will allow themselves to be defined by the prophecy, or break free from it and chart their own path, write their own ending. Ralsei starts to doubt his hope that the ending can be changed, while Susie refuses to accept the future laid out before her. In Chapter 4, her title changes from Dark Hero carries out fate with the blade to Acts of Justice, faces fate with the blade. This is a story centered on a deeply prescriptive prophecy, one so specific it includes the facial hair of the hero's classmate and the answers to puzzles. As we head towards the final chapters of the game, it makes sense that we're beginning to see the way it's suffocating to live a life predetermined for you. So to bring it back around to this guy and to Oscillation 2, I think it's really important that neither Gaster nor the Angel are presented by the game as blanket good or evil. It's pretty standard in other stories that light and dark are positive and negative respectively. But Deltarune goes out of its way to show us that too much light and too much dark are problematic. There's that pendulum swinging again. We can't swing too far towards light, embracing fate, nor dark, embracing freedom. I think it's pretty likely that this relationship will be at the forefront of the later chapters, particularly chapters 6 and 7. Gaster looks to subvert the prophecy, to change its outcome to his new future, to defy fate. I have a lot more to say about the relationship between Gaster and the Angel, which you'll almost certainly hear about in the future. But for now, the key thing is that oscillation, light and dark, fate and freedom, to lean into the prophecy or to defy it. And following on pretty closely from that, I want to talk about the Grand Fountain. If you've been paying attention to Deltarune theories over the past few months, this is a pretty commonly held belief. At the end of the game, the Grand Fountain will be sealed. I don't think this will be the case. First off, there's some pretty obvious textual evidence for this. In Chapter 1, the prophecy talks explicitly about balance between the two worlds. Closing all the dark worlds would be the opposite of balance. Just like too many fountains shifts the balance, we can assume the same for too few. And in Chapter 4, one of the prophecy panels refers to saving the worlds, plural. But it becomes even clearer when we come back to the things light and dark represent. They're not just different worlds, they're also different perspectives. By moving between them, Deltarune is able to acknowledge both sides of the argument without picking one. We're able to see the strengths and flaws of both, like we discussed earlier. So if we seal off the Grand Fountain, close off dark worlds for good, then the game is picking the light, the postmodern, right? The whimsy, the idealism, the optimism that we can create a better world, all of that is tied directly to the dark worlds, and we'd be cutting that off by leaving them behind entirely. If you swap things around, it seems absurd to think that Deltarune would end with the heroes foregoing their lives in the light world to stay in the dark world forever. Instead, this is where those seemingly contradictory descriptors I mentioned before come back in. Pragmatic idealism, informed naivety. Rather than picking the light world or the dark world, at the end of Deltarune, I suspect the characters will need to take what they learned from both worlds and move forward, cautiously optimistic, striving for a better world while acknowledging the difficulties in making it happen, weaving the two perspectives offered by the two worlds together into something new. That's the tone I think Fox will want to strike with the game's ending. Not overly negative, but not cloyingly positive, and certainly not sealing the dark worlds away forever. It's a common ending to many fantasy stories. The main characters must leave behind the world they discovered and go back to their normal lives. But Deltarune isn't a standard fantasy story, playing out standard story beats. As it stands, I don't think the game can end on any note other than this, returning to the balance, saving both worlds, and taking away important lessons from either side. There's only one more thing to touch on, the why of it all. Why is Deltarune metamodern? Why does Toby Fox seek to use this oscillation across so many facets of the game? I think it's because Deltarune is a game about felt experience. The game does everything it can to highlight and spend time with the feelings of its characters and its audience. It's a story about the power of fiction, of finding hope no matter the circumstance. But these characters have different, often conflicting worldviews. They have different backgrounds, they've gone on different journeys which made them who they are. Like the postmodern stories which came before it, Deltarune wants to highlight and explore the experiences of people on the fringe of society, those who are left out of those modernist catch-all universal truths, the utopia we can create if we just do this one trick doctors hate. But in the same breath, the game doesn't want to lean into the postmodern snark, to laugh at the suggestion that a better world is possible. It has to oscillate, to find a middle ground. That yes, the world is often ugly and dire and unfair, but we'll strive for a better future anyway. The characters will go through and learn this lesson, yes, but as an audience we will too. Games are an interactive medium, and Deltarune gives us the opportunity to take part, to engage with this oscillation too. In highlighting the felt experience of the characters, the players is brought to the forefront too. It's something Toby Fox said himself at the Indie Live Expo in 2020. When a player's heart matches the creators, something strange happens. The game screen flashes like a cursed mirror. The player's heart begins to shine. That player will be changed forever, and they may receive an incredible amount of hope from playing your game. This is the power of indie games. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't really think anybody would stick around past the point people realized I wasn't talking about Deltarune for the first 10 minutes or so. So thank you for watching, much appreciated. I've been working on this video on and off for literally over a year now, so it's really great to finally be able to put it out there. I hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know if you want to hear more on this topic. Like I said earlier, oscillation is just one of a handful of techniques Deltarune utilizes that are metamodern in nature, and there's definitely more there to explore. In the meantime, you can follow me on Blue Sky or check out my blog. I've been doing some posts here and there discussing some other aspects of Deltarune I don't plan to make a full video about. And of course, I'd like to thank a couple of people who helped me get this video done. First of all, thank you to Greg Dember, who I've mentioned and quoted a few times already. I reached out to him early on while I was still figuring out how to structure this video, and his advice really helped. If you want to learn more about metamodernism more generally, his book Say Hello to Metamodernism is absolutely fantastic and worth a read. It's a really good introduction to the topic. I'd also like to thank my friend Pigeon, who helped me refine the script greatly, and Yatode, who provided some Undertale footage for me. I didn't want to expose how bad I am at the Sans fight, so he very kindly stepped in to do it instead. If you're on the lookout for more videos about Deltarune in the future, definitely go and subscribe to his channel, linked below. He's working on a video about the identity of the knight, so look forward to that. Anyway, that's it, bye!